Alright, the purpose of this video today is compression testing. We want to be able to assess the mechanical status of this engine. Is it mechanically working right? We could have a cylinder not working, not firing, not carrying its load. And it could be a fuel issue, but it could be a mechanical issue. Okay. Real quick, in mechanical injection, we can go ahead and crack an injector when it's running, rag over top to collect fuel, and we'll look at RPM drop. If the RPM drops down, that cylinder is probably working. If the RPM doesn't drop down, then we know we've got a problem with that particular cylinder. But it does get messy. A lot of the newer ones, you can do a cylinder short test or a cylinder load test by actually stopping that cylinder from firing, and you're going to look again at the engine RPM. Another one though is, as this is running, one cylinder that's not running on this particular one, it's going to run really rough, but one's going to run hot because it's firing, the other one's not going to run hot. So what we can do is use a infrared thermometer, and as it's running, we'll go ahead and check and see what it's at number 2 cylinder. We'll check and see what it's at number 1 cylinder. And that way we can also check and find out if it's those cylinders are even. If they're even, they're going to have the same excuse me, they're going to have the same temperature. If they're not even, you're going to have one that's not firing is going to have a much lower temperature. Okay, but let's say you've got a V8, you've got something that is electronic fuel injection, and we don't have a scan tool. But if you can get to the exhaust manifold and go right down the engine on every exhaust manifold port, right where it comes out of the cylinder head, you can come up with some numbers and determine which cylinder is your problem cylinder. Okay, that's a quick down and dirty. Okay, on this one right here, we're going to just run a basic compression test on it. Now the book also calls it, we can pull the injectors out. Okay, we can pull these guys out, pull them both out at the same time. We can run a compression test, but when we do that, we break into the system. We break into the fuel system, so we're going to have to bleed it when we get done. They do have the testers for that. So when you screw something out, you're going to be able to screw in an adapter where the injector was. But the easy way I like on these is going in through where the glow plugs are. Okay, going in through where the glow plugs are. Now, ideally, if you're just looking at an engine and maybe a dead engine, you're trying to do that, you'll crank it over and you'll see a difference. But you may not get the peak compression unless that engine's warmed up. The piston will expand in the cylinder, everything's up to operating temperature, you'll get your best sealing. When it's cold, you get a little bit of extra blow-by that's going to lower your compression reading. So take a look and see whether it's calling for cold or hot. Okay. Now we're going to do here first is I'm going to go ahead and get these, already got them loosened up right here. We're going to go ahead and take our glow plugs out. So we got to take, on this particular one, I got to take the straps off, so we'll go ahead and get these leads off. Now, this wire right here, when we go ahead and run it, will be a hot wire. So we want to make sure that this guy is sitting up here where it's not going to ground out. And maybe even just taking a piece of tape and putting on top of it might actually, be a better idea so it doesn't ground out. Okay, so if you put some tape on it, you don't have much right there. But if that just arcs and sparks right there, we may end up melting some wires down. So we'll go ahead and get this guy out right here. That's the strap between the two. And we'll go ahead and get in here with the ratchet. Go ahead and get these guys loosened up. Get those guys flung out of there. On some of these right here, you may have to take off the valve cover for these Kubotas, but not always. A lot of times these glow plugs are external that we can get to. Duramaxes, some of you guys have done the Duramaxes in here, and those guys are sitting right out there along the outside of the head, so it's a much easier place to get to than instead of trying to go in through the injector hole. We got those two glow plugs out. When this thing cranks, I'm only going to have compression on one cylinder, so we keep the speed up. if you had multiple cylinders and you had some that were firing better than others, had better compression than others, you may get an erratic, a kind of crank to it that may not have the same speed on all cylinders. So this way, what we can do is, with both injectors out, we can go ahead and crank this guy and be able to read what the compression is. Now, the first thing we're going to do is what we call a dry test. We're just going to put an injector, we're going to put the adapter in the glow plug hole, and then we're going to go ahead and crank this thing over. We're going to crank it until we see it stop. Okay, so this adapter is just going to go right in. Go kind of easy on these things when you screw these in. All they've got to do is just come in and seat. They don't have to be cranked in. They don't have to be overly tightened. I'm going to screw that right where the injector goes. Goes in there a ways. It's going to set down on the bottom and just touch up against the head. There it is. Let's see if I can get this guy just to snug just a bit. There, that's all I'm doing. I'm not going beyond that. That's going to be good enough for what we're trying to do. Now the compression tester that you're going to run with a diesel is going to be a lot higher. You'll notice this thing goes up to 1,000. You also know it's missing its bezel. It's been dropped a few times on the ground. It's over in there, but maybe with the glare you might not be able to see the numbers as well, so I just left that guy off. Okay? But it's got a quick connect on there just like on an air hose. So come over here, lift it up, snap it in place. Okay? We're reading at 0. Now I don't want this thing to start, so I'm going to go ahead and hold the shut off. Okay? Go ahead and hold the shut off. Careful where the hose goes. Let me go ahead and get some tape on this thing right here first. Again, I'm a little concerned that we might end up arcing and sparking, and we go from there. And you know me and arc and sparks, we just don't like to do that. I have accidentally on these things before where we've gone ahead and when you put this back on, that it gets caught underneath the valve cover. So be always careful on those wires that run around the valve cover. A lot of times they're hot. And so I'm going to put tape on that so we don't have to worry about it. Set it over here where it's not going to get caught in the fan. Now I'm going to go ahead and hold the fuel shutoff off. And I'm going to go ahead and crank it and be kind of careful where the flywheel is right here too. And I'm going to crank it until it stops going up. Okay, this particular one, I believe down in here in the bottom of the adapter, you notice it didn't hold the compression. If you can see it on there or not, it was bouncing up. I was getting it up to about 200. That's kind of low for this one. This one should be up, I think 327 is the minimum required for this guy. So 200 is a little bit low. Okay, but that connector in there is one of the problems. There's a little Schrader valve in there. If it gets a little bit of carbon coming out of the cylinder, it's going to cause that thing to bounce. But 200 is going to be a little bit low. So what's the problem? Could it be the valves? Could it be the rings and pistons, cylinders? So the next test I'm going to do is going to be the wet test on that particular cylinder. Okay? If they're sitting pretty good, I don't worry about a wet test. If they're sitting within spec, I'm not going to worry about that. But I'm going to go ahead and get this guy spun out of here. And let me look and see. It might not, just the Schrader valve just may need to be hit a couple times here. Get that guy out of there. There's a little Schrader valve in there. And we're going to go ahead and tap it a couple times and see if we can get it to free up. Maybe. Well, it's kind of not even moving, so it's probably stuck. Yeah, see, that's what happened. The Schrader valve is actually broken there, so it's not going to maintain. So probably we'll have to end up getting a new adapter for this, but we can kind of look and crank on it and see how high that goes. Okay, so get that guy out of there. Now remember, at the top of the cylinder we have very little room up there for clearance. So if I put in a whole syringe full of oil, what would happen is on compression, when that piston comes up, the oil compresses or tries to compress, and you can't compress oil. It acts as a solid. You get a hydrolock, so the piston will come up and boom, and stop. And you may break something, or you just may come to a screeching halt. So what I'm going to do though is put in 1 milliliter. All right, so we're going to go ahead and do the wet test. You take a syringe, and I only want to put 1 milliliter of oil in there, and I'm going to use the same oil that I end up using in the engine itself. So I'm just going to get this. I got a little cap full of oil right here. I'm going to pull that up until I see 1 milliliter. Okay. Take that guy over. Put him right down in the hole. Okay. So now there's oil at the top of that piston. That oil's going to come down and coat the rings. The thing is, oil can't seal up a bad valve. So if the valve timing's off, if there's a blown head gasket, if the valve is not seating, like it's a burnt valve or just a valve that's not sealing properly, it's not going to take care of that. But if we've got worn rings and cylinders and pistons, we can take care of that. So what I'm looking for is, does this jump up in reading or not, or does it stay the same? If it stays the same, that tells, or comes up just a little bit, that's going to tell me it's going to be one of those valve cylinder head gasket, something along those lines. If it jumps up fairly significantly, I sealed up the rings temporarily and got a good compression. So let me get this guy back in here again. Okay, again, just snug in, not very tight. Let's go ahead and get this guy snapped back on here again. Okay, same thing's going to happen. We'll get this guy over here where we can kind of watch it. I'm going to make sure I hold the throttle off, and we're going to crank it. We're hitting about 200 before, so let's see what happens this time. Okay. I got up to 325. Okay, now she's leaking back down there again. At 325, wow, that's a significant change. Okay, that's right up to where it's supposed to be. So I would have to look at this engine and say we've got some issue with the lower end. Valves we don't know about, but they seem to be sealing up. But if I can seal it up, we've got some issue with the rings, and we've got some issue with the piston cylinder. Somewhere in there we're getting blow by. So we go ahead and go put this thing back together again. Go ahead and take out these adapters. Now we did put oil in there. You did hear that thing kind of do a little spit, and what happened is it's trying to start. These will run on engine oil. That's where you get the engine runaways. Is somehow you're getting a lot of times it's the feed line to the turbo is actually pumping oil right in through a bad seal in the turbo, and the engine will sit there and run on it. So you got to be kind of careful. Now, as you're doing readings across the board, if you just find one low one, we're going to be doing a wet test on that particular one and see what we end up with. But let's say I'm working on a V8, and I find 2 cylinders side by side that have very little compression. You do a wet test and they really don't jump up. What happened is probably between those two we blew the head gasket, so the head gasket doesn't seal and separate those two. Okay, so between that's one thing. Another one would be what happens if they're all kind of low and you do a wet test and it really doesn't jump up. What I found most times on stuff like that is the timing belt or chain is not quite in time. So our valves are not open and closing at the proper time, so we're not getting those gulps of air like we're supposed to. So that's one of the other things with that. But anyway, a good compression test will give you a lot of distance as to what's going on. All right. Now see if we can get our wire over here. See if I can get my tape back off of here. This is where this always comes in fun, because now we gotta get the tape off of there. Get that guy right on out of there. Otherwise we'd have a giant crumb stature if you remember any of my talks with electrical. Alright, so we're gonna get this guy on up in there first. This little strap connects them together. We're gonna go ahead and get this guy on here. We're gonna go ahead and get these two down on here and run them down, snug them down. This guy, there's two different styles. This one takes a screwdriver. This other one right here takes a 7mm. They've been replaced over time. So we're gonna go ahead and get this guy tight right here. Okay, get this guy in here, takes a screwdriver, you snug that guy down, so my glow plugs are all hooked up. Alright, so now you're going to see some smoke, or you won't see it because we got the exhaust fan on, but you'll get some smoke when you first fire up a test, or an engine you tested with wet test, because you got oil in the cylinders, it's got to burn out a little bit. So let's see what we get going on here. Let's see it here. Go ahead and turn the glow plug on a little bit. 6 seconds, light goes out. I could see the exhaust coming out of right here, so that's typical. So make sure before you hand that vehicle or that whatever it is, whether it's a tractor, truck, whatever, back to the customer, that you've gone ahead and run it and done your cleaning out of the oil that you put in there. Otherwise, the customer is going to look at it and say, "Hey, it's smoking worse than when I brought it in. What'd you do?" So. But just do that as a customer service kind of thing, you know. They don't need to see that. It's just something you did, and you just got to get the stuff cleaned up. It's no different than wiping down the hood. All right. So based on that, then you can go ahead and determine whether you need to do further work on this. I would be a little concerned. This engine, maybe the last time Suits put it together, broke a ring on it. Okay. Remember how when we top those rings in, they can pop off, and that could very well be what's going on with this one. But to see a significant increase, like from 200 to 3 1/4, lends to the lower end. Okay.